Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. This is the second episode in a series of 3 discussions on ways business will adapt, rise, and thrive to remain resilient. Last week, I led a panel discussion about the importance of rapid antigen testing to keep our employees safe and reopen economies. Our topic today is driving employee wellness and engagement. Joining me today are 3 distinguished panelists. So first, CeCe Morken, Chief Executive Officer at Headspace. Second, Gianni Giacomelli, the Chief Innovation Officer at Genpact. And third is Piyush Mehta, the Chief Human Resource Officer at Genpact. Today, we really want to discuss 2 topics, which one is innovative ways for companies to drive employee wellness and engagement with a remote workforce and in the midst of a pandemic. And 2, roles for business leaders in prioritizing mental health and the impact of technology on enhancing the employee experience. So let's get started. I'll direct questions to each of you, but as mentioned, please feel free to jump in if you have additional points to add. And then for our audience members, please post questions in the chat as well. So let's start with you, Piyush. As head of HR of more than 100,000 employees, roughly half of them in India, how is employee wellness changing since the pandemic, and particularly right now with the rising cases in India?
Okay, great, Darren. So first of all, it's wonderful to be on this session with you, CeCe and Gianni. I wish it were happier times, but let's make the most of it and we'll get there. Look, employee health and wellness has always been critical to us as an organization. Now, the last 18 months have only brought it a lot more front and center, and in ways which, frankly, we had never imagined or hoped that it would. As an employer of 100,000 people, we set our goals. The other things that we are doing, a robust COVID-19 section on our internet, which gets updated on our intranet, which gets updated on a regular basis, a COVID helpline, which is real time, so that, employees in today's circumstances where things are changing every day can call and check on, which hospital has available beds, connections to doctors, support in terms of hospitalization and so on. We made the decision to cover cost for all COVID vaccinations in those countries where we are not covered, offering rapid antigen or PCR testing facilities, including drive-in facilities at our offices. So these are some of the examples that we've launched at this point in time. But look, here is the often unseen impact. These times take a huge mental toll on people as well. And whether it's the illness of a loved one or the extreme pressure we face at work, these create some pretty profound impact and consequences on people's wellness. And therefore, well-being is a huge component of what we need to offer our people. We've set up wellness help desks. We've got trained psychologists to help address the needs of employees, weekly programs for people to be part of that to focus on personal development. One of our really valuable go-to resources for encouraging employee mental health is Headspace. So I'm really delighted that CeCe is on this session to share more with us on that. So a fairly lengthy summary, Darren, of all the things that you and the team.
And Piyush, a perfect tie into CeCe, a question I was going to ask you. So CeCe, obviously employee wellness includes not just physical health and wellness, but mental health and wellness. During the pandemic, we've seen mental health being equal and for many people even more challenging than the physical health. How is Headspace uniquely qualified to help people cope?
Yeah, Darren, and I have to just say before I jump in that I'm the amount of employee struggle that you all have had to work through is just phenomenal, and the way you've connected hearts and minds to put employees first is really commendable. So I'm very humbled by all the work that you've done. To answer your question, let me set some context first, which is that every one of us has mental health. It's just a matter of where we are on the mental health continuum. If you think about it from the standpoint of you could be in the promotion and prevention angle of it, you could move more towards the center and be doing condition management, or you could be in the more extreme of curation for chronic conditions. And through our lives, we will move back and forth on this continuum. In fact, 46% of us will have a diagnosable mental health condition in our lifetime. Most of that is going to be centered on stress and anxiety, and 60% of that will go untreated. And when that happens, that's what leads us to more chronic conditions and even physical conditions. So at Headspace, what we are is actually a mental health and well-being company. And our goal is to build healthy routines, or maybe think about it as habits that last a lifetime. And what we're focused on is teaching people to be mindful. Maybe you do a meditation and then you exercise and you eat and you work and you play, you sleep, you deal with your family, you deal with social unrest. All of these are opportunities to be mindful. And for Headspace, at the core of our offerings is credible expertise backed by science. So there's a high degree of efficacy in these journeys or pathways that we recommend to people. And just to put some stats behind that, what we see in terms of reducing signs of depression, they reduced by 46%, anxiety by 31%, and then improvements in resiliency of about 16%.
It's amazing. And CeCe, I'd say that we've had incredibly positive reactions from our employees that are now using Headspace. So thank you. Flip to you. Let's talk about technology. Today, technology is playing a big role in how companies work virtually. Would you address how technology helped Genpact with employee wellness in particular?
Well, Darren, you know that these days wellness is really part of running the business, I think. It drives, in general, it drives motivation, it drives energy. I would also argue it drives culture, if you think about it. So especially when we are crossing uncharted territories like the ones, unfortunately, we've gone through in the last year and a half, the first line of defense to ensure the resilience of the business, I guess, is the employee's wellness. Right? That's where the waves break. And if you think about how we try to harness the power of wellness, is we make it personal. We try to create a connection with our employees so that we check in periodically, because we know that the emotional fuel is really connected to the wellness. And it's also social, right? So it's human connections. When you have human connections, people feel better, and they actually take the habits that CeCe were talking about. I'll give you an example how technology can help establishing connections at scale, if you think about it. So the example is something that Piyush's organization has been using for the last 2 years is a bot. It's an artificial intelligence powered bot. It's called Amber. What it does, it periodically reaches out to the employees. But it's not just a questionnaire. You remember the employee surveys. It really engages with people, right, in a very personalized manner. When it comes to me, it kind of feels like somebody who's chatting with me on the other side. And so what that helps do is it detects signals that give us a pulse and an early warning, if you will, of segments of our population that needs help. And again, when you have 100,000 people, you need to do it that way. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do it, right? And so then you can direct efforts. For example, you go to the managers or to the business leaders, but you got to do it in a nuanced and human way. Otherwise, it becomes, cold and impersonal. And I think, Piyush, we were talking about it the other day. Since the inception, this has been 500,000 chats, right? So it's invaluable. It really keeps the sense of purpose afloat, which is, again, very much related to motivation. So I do think that technologies help that personalization of the interaction at scale. In my view, this is just the beginning, right? You have the ability to reach out to people. I think the next frontier is really to help people connect with the people who are not their usual daily connects, right? When you were in an office, you'd bump into people at the water cooler. Now you don't do that anymore. You really talk mostly with what are called, in my MIT work, we call them strong ties, right? And people who are functionally related to you. Those strong ties are very resilient to shocks, but the weak ties, those are the perpetuate the culture, create connectivity between people, between the new people and the people who've been there for some time. So they're really incredibly important for culture. They're incredibly important for innovation. And all of that is actually not easy to redo through teams, etc. My money is that we will figure that out from a technology standpoint, but I guess that's a story for another day.
Yeah, absolutely. But speaking of culture, Gianni, let me jump to you, Piyush. The pandemic has taught us a lot about employee wellness and workplace culture in a time of remote working. And those things can't just be owned by HR. So what are the new leadership traits and characteristics you see rising in importance, particularly as you look at new leaders, as well as maybe coaching the current leaders you have in the company?
Great question, Darren. So look, first, I think you're absolutely right. Culture is never something that only one part of the organization or HR or any individual can own. It is owned by the entire organization. I mean, it's about how employees engage, how they are treated in their local groups, with their teams, their interaction with the leader, with a supervisor, with a peer, with a team member. All of that determines culture, and therefore ownership it's very clear that it needs to be established across the company. Now, working from anywhere obviously brings a huge set of challenges to keep employees feeling engaged, as well as ensuring that new employees who come to the organization are integrated well into the company as well. That's a big challenge, right? In supporting our remote teams and promoting our culture and our values, the first thing that becomes very important is what's the North Star that you're navigating to? What's the purpose of the organization that you're navigating to? And we were fortunate that we kind of built and froze and clearly articulated and communicated our purpose at this time, which I think made a lot of difference in terms of how we went about continuing to reinforce that culture, and it provided that North Star even for the new people who joined the company. I think in these times, what becomes even more important is empathy, is compassion, is being considerate. In all the countries that we've operated in, we've seen some absolutely heroic efforts by employees to serve other employees, to serve clients, to serve the communities they work for, the family members of the loved ones impacted by COVID-19. The second part, I think, is about open communication. Communication from the leadership, from the CEO of the company, from all the visible leaders at this point in time. And, we may not have all the answers. I think it's okay to say we don't have all the answers. It's also about listening at this point of time and ensuring that that two-way communication is happening. So, using everything at your disposal, right, from videos to town halls to emails, but personalized one-on-ones as well. Unfortunately, we are constrained to doing this through technology, but look, it provides you many opportunities which you didn't have before. So, while it's not as good as real time, but there are many benefits that you get from this contingent benefit. So I think the other part that we realize that becomes really important is these times is the whole employee experience. Okay, separate from the pandemic, but I think very important, a sign of the times is employees are looking for consumer grade experience in everything that they engage with. The technology, the tools that we provide, and some of the thinking, for example, that Gianni is leading for us on the whole water cooler, virtual water cooler experiment, or how our training platform continues to deliver consumer grade experience for people. I think that becomes important. He talked about Amber. Now, what that does is it allows you to understand how people are feeling at this point of time on a real-time basis across the organization. So it's not a one-time, it's an ongoing measure or a dipstick of how the organization is feeling, and it gives you very specific feedback on what you can work on and what you can't work on. One more learning from this time, it was, I don't think anyone predicted where we would land, and therefore the agility to be able to respond to something like this. And we've talked about a bunch of things that have happened, right? That agility becomes a very important part of the culture, which is about curiosity. It's about learning. It's about unlearning. And then it's about going out and executing and then, continuing that whole virtuous cycle. So I think, all of these things become very important. And throughout, again, one thing that is very critical to do is to ensure people know we are focused on their health and well-being. Our two priorities, people's health and well-being and serving our clients at this point of time. That becomes a fundamental aspect of everything that we are talking about when we talk about culture. Make sense?
Got it. Yep, got it. Thank you, sir. And maybe CeCe, I want to switch back to you for a second. Let's talk a little bit about your clients. You obviously have a very wide and diverse client base. And imagine, from what I'm reading, a growing client base as well. And I, by the way, congratulations on your Netflix series as well. It's incredible to see you guys going to, I hear, season 3, which is incredible. And I do encourage anyone, if you haven't seen the Netflix series, to take a look at what Headspace is doing. But what trends are you seeing with your clients, particularly over the last year, and in particular as it relates to mental health?
Yeah, and I'll build on a little bit on what Piyush said as well as I go through this. And by the way, I'll also make a comment on Netflix, because one of the things that those kinds of programs are designed to do is to make mental health and mental wellness a topic for everyone. And so, the one that's currently out there is about sleep, which most of us struggle with. And so it's designed to show that it's okay. Everybody has these issues, and the more we talk about them, the more apt we are to deal with them. So we did a study last year in the workplace to just understand about 20 different industries, across several thousand employees, and just a couple quick stats that came back. 65% said that work is a significant source of stress. Probably not a surprise. 42% said that work-life balance was the greatest source of stress. And as you can imagine, that was highest among caregivers and therefore women. And then this one, surprised us a bit, which was almost half of them said they lose 2 hours of work per day because of stress. The next thing I would say that I think is the biggest change we've seen is we've all talked about bring our whole self to work, not what's been happening in the past, because bringing our whole self to work means that we have to focus on our mind as well as our physical well-being. And previously, we focused so much more on the physical well-being. And if you think about taking care of the wholeness of the person, especially the mind, then you're improving everything that you hired them and brought them on board to do.
Since this pandemic started, I'm amazed at how many of our clients, they don't start the call with, business. They start the call with, how's your team doing? What's going on in India? What's happening, with your folks? And how are your folks keeping up with mental health? And a lot of clients are asking us, what are your best practices on mental health? So I would say your stat about 5x CEOs talking about this on earnings calls doesn't surprise me, just given what I guess I'm personally seeing in the workplace as well. Gianni, here's a kind of a really important question. I know a lot of clients I speak to are been talking about, but which is really with the pandemic altering how work gets done so dramatically, and most companies are working from home and are in a remote situation. How do you find that employees are making time to continue to learn, and particularly, let's say, even brand new employees? How do we train them differently? How do we make sure we're continuing to develop new skills? We're seeing in our world things like digital take off quite rapidly. So how do we keep our remote team learning?
Look, Darren, at the end of the day, in the last 2 years, we've seen something that probably we wouldn't have seen in a generation if this thing hadn't happened that way. I mean, education has been one of the most resistant to change. This is one of the areas that have been most resistant to change. People had to be ferried into classrooms to do things for the longest time. And if you ask people, can you do it differently? They say, no, you need to have it, in person. The reality is, it has exploded. We had last year 2.5 times more learning than ever before. And actually LinkedIn has similar statistics. So let's take a step back, right? So before we talk about tools and methods, let's talk about the human, right? Always center the design of anything that you do around the human. Mastery is a driver for motivation. It's actually one of the responses that people have to feel that they are resilient and strong. If you give them the tools to develop that mastery at their own pace, at their own convenience, in the flow of work, when they find a little bit of time, people will jump on it. And it really helped us deliver at scale and at a granularity that is unprecedented. We have about 75 skills. We have over 10,000 hours of learning available that we didn't have a year and a half ago. 70% of our people use it at least monthly, up to probably 15% before the pandemic and before this technology was deployed. So last year we've ended up with about 10 million hours of learning, which, by the way, in itself is a huge number. It's not really what matters. What matters is it's about the skills that matter to that person in that role at that moment. And that you wouldn't be able to do it in person. The other thing that we discovered also, back to the Amber chatbots part, is that learning is correlated with the sentiment on Amber. So you really see that people feel better when they're able to span their wings a little bit. And so we were so heartened about the results that we also opened a part of Genome to the public through our Adapt and Rise website to help them reskill during the pandemic. So I think in a very unfortunate and surprising way, this has been a boon for the ability of people to learn.
Got it. That's great. Hey, I'm just looking at our chat window, and I've got a question that came in, CeCe, for you. And it's really around meditation. I guess a lot of people associate Headspace and meditation. So the question is, I've read a lot about people relying more and more on meditation as a positive coping mechanism. Can you help me understand that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm going to maybe break this into a couple different categories, but the first one is mindfulness. And mindfulness is really about learning how to be fully present and engaged in the moment, very aware of your thoughts and feelings without distraction or judgment, and to do so with an open and curious mind. Meditation is an exercise where we learn to be more mindful. And if you think about some of the things that you might focus on through these exercises to be more mindful, it might be how we choose to see life, how we choose to see the good in ourselves and others that you can carry through the day. And that helps you to be mindful across all the activities that you have during the day.
Amazing. That's helpful. Hey, so let me follow up with one last question, personal question, and I'll even offer my own answer here as well, which really is, and I'll ask each of you this same question. So how do you personally manage your own mental health? And I'll just say for myself, I believe at work we spend most of our time on the right brain versus left brain. So we always spend our time, I find myself at least, on one side of the brain. So for my own mental health, I either focus on I'm a guitar player, so either play guitar or art. So those two things I try to use to help me get around mental health. But CeCe, Piyush, Gianni, how do you guys cope with mental health?
I kind of just gave mine away, which is about, okay. And I just gave mine away by starting with I start with an intention for the day. And I just listed.
Second thing, Darren, that I think has helped a lot is, at least for me, is it's going with the flow. There's all kinds of advice out there. There's all kinds of framework. There's all kinds of things. But I think it's important to apply the filter of what works for each person to themselves. And I think that's really helped me in terms of, it could be one thing at one particular point of time. It could be another thing at time. I find allowing yourself the luxury of making choices as opposed to force-fitting frameworks has helped a lot. And the third thing is vulnerabilities. I mean, CeCe talked about it, which is a very powerful message. Getting to know your own vulnerabilities is actually a tremendous way of growing and developing yourself.
Gianni?
Maybe I'll top this up. I mean, for me, I work in innovations, right? And you force the mind to be in the now, right? So kind of being a little more deliberate in trying to be mindful. One of the things really is people. People ground you in the now, because when you talk to them, you talk to a good friend or a good colleague, they push you to be there now. They don't let you stray, right? So that's one of the things. The other thing that helps me a lot is nature.